Biological Classification Session 1. In this module, we are going to have an introduction to the classification of living organisms. Dear children, the term classification would be very familiar to you as you would have come across this term many times in your previous classes. So, in this module, I'm not going to exhaust you with again explaining what is classification. We'll just have a quick recap of what is biological classification. Classification is the scientific procedure of arranging organisms into groups and subgroups on the basis of their similarities and dissimilarities and placing the groups in a hierarchy of categories. So, organisms, all the living organisms are grouped based on a set of characters, based on the similarities and dissimilarities, and they are placed in a group of hierarchies of categories. Hierarchy refers to the biological classification of living organisms in successive levels of complexity. So, organisms are organized or arranged based on their complexity in successive levels, and that is called as biological classification. Now, let us learn the importance of classification. We know there are millions and millions of living organisms in this biosphere, and it is impossible to study each and every organism. So, classification or classifying all these organisms into categories helps the study of one or two organisms of a particular group. And this study gives us sufficient information about the essential features of the entire group. So, that's the first importance of classification. And second, it helps in identification of new organisms. Many organisms in this biosphere are yet to be discovered. And when they are identified based on a particular characteristics, they can be placed in a particular category. And classification also helps in knowing the relationship among the different groups of organisms. And the organisms of the past cannot be studied without a proper system of classification. So, dear children, now it is clear for you why living organisms has to be classified. The attempts to classify organisms began centuries ago, and different systems of classifications were proposed, namely the artificial system of classification, the natural system of classification, and phylogenetic system of classification. Let us study each in detail. The artificial system of classification was proposed by Aristotle, and he considered one or two morphological characters for grouping of organisms. Morphology means external appearance of the organisms is considered in order to group the organisms. And the plants were grouped into two, the flowering and non-flowering plants. And he classified plants into trees, shrubs, and herbs based on their morphological characters. And the animals were again grouped into two, anima and anima. That means the animals that had red blood and those animals that lacked red blood. So that was the characteristics he considered for classifying the organisms into plants and animals. And it was proposed by Aristotle. The natural system of classification, it took into consideration the comparable study of number of characters and not only the morphological characters. And it brought out the natural similarities and dissimilarities and also the natural relationship among the organisms. So it considered the similarities, dissimilarities, and the natural relationships existing among organisms. And the natural system of classification was proposed by Bentham and Hooker. And the third system of classification is the phylogenetic system of classification. It is based on the evolutionary relationship among organisms. In this system, organisms are classified on the basis of their evolution on Earth from primitive to highly evolved, based on their level of complexity. And it was proposed by Engler and Prandtl and also Hutchinson system of classification. So the three systems of classification, the artificial system of classification, the natural system of classification, and Phylogenetic system of classification. Depending upon the type of system of classification of organisms, they were classified into any of the following kingdom systems. And the different kingdom systems of classification were the two kingdom, the three kingdom, and five kingdom system of classification. Dear children, in this module, we learned what is biological classification, the need for biological classification, and we learned about the artificial, natural, and phylogenetic systems of classification. Thank you.